Construction begins Monday. Sign here. That was all Darinda Yansy said when she stepped onto my porch with a clipboard in one hand and a pen already clicking in the other. No greeting. No explanation. No proof. No deed. No document that actually gave her the right to stand there and tell me what was about to happen on land my family had owned longer than her entire neighborhood had existed. She smiled at me like the matter had already been settled somewhere above my head, like my signature was not permission, like it was just paperwork she was kind enough to collect. I looked at the pen, then I looked at her, and I did not take it. Darinda's smile tightened. That was the first time I saw it, that small flash of irritation behind her polished face. The kind people show when they are used to being obeyed and suddenly meet someone who does not move when pushed. She placed the clipboard on the porch railing anyway. Then she turned around, walked back toward her white Cadillac Escalade, and drove away through the dust, like the conversation was finished, like I had lost before I even understood the game. But Darinda Yansy made one mistake that day. She thought silence meant surrender. She thought an old rancher in a work shirt was too tired, too poor, or too simple to fight back. She thought the land was just dirt. She had no idea that dirt carries memory, and she had no idea what was buried in the lockbox under my workbench. A few months later, they built a pool on my land. A full community swimming pool, concrete shell, tile work, filtration system, pergola, lights, all of it. Nearly $200,000 of HOA money poured into the wrong piece of Texas ground. And when they finished building it, when the ribbon was cut, when the pictures were taken, when Darinda smiled in front of that shining blue water like she had conquered something, they sent me the maintenance bill. That was the moment I stopped treating it like a misunderstanding. Because a mistake can be corrected. A misunderstanding can be talked through. But when someone steals your land, builds on it, lies about it, and then charges you for the privilege of being robbed, that is not confusion. That is confidence. And confidence like that deserves to be educated. My name is Garrett Wolfson. I am 58 years old. I have spent most of my life fixing diesel engines, pulling calves out of bad weather, mending fences, and learning that loud people usually run out of power faster than patient ones. I own 34 acres on the western edge of Calderwood Pines, Texas. Not lease, not borrow, not used by permission. Owned. Present tense. Clear deed. Clean chain. My grandfather, Earl Wolfson, cleared that land in 1951 with his own hands. Back then, it was cedar, mesquite, rock, and stubborn soil that fought every shovel. He drove iron survey pins into the corners himself and filed the deed at the county clerk's office before most of the people now arguing about my land were even born. Those pins were not decoration. They were a promise. This is where the Wolfson land begins. This is where it ends. My father ran hay and cattle on it until he died in 2009. When it came to me, it came clean. No mortgage, no lien, no HOA, no neighborhood covenant, no committee, no board president with a clipboard. Just land, fence, water, cattle, and a deed so old the paper makes a dry cracking sound when you unfold it. For 11 years, things stayed peaceful. Calderwood Pines was built next to me after a developer named Prescott Dunleavy bought 600 acres and carved it into subdivision lots, 220 homes, brick fronts, curved streets, neat mailboxes, community rules, mandatory dues, architectural reviews, the whole machine of modern suburban control. I had no problem with any of it. Most of the residents were decent people. They waved when they passed. Some bought beef from me. Some let their kids stand by the fence and watch the cattle. I was not part of their HOA, and they were not part of my ranch. That arrangement worked fine, until Darinda Yansy became board president. Darinda was 54, a former real estate paralegal, and the kind of person who treated an HOA like a kingdom that had accidentally forgotten to give her a crown. She sent certified letters the way other people send birthday cards. She loved rules. She loved stamps. She loved phrases like community standards, shared obligations, and non-compliance notice. And she loved the sound of her own authority. Her Escalade even had a magnetic sign on the door that read Proud Board President. I wish I were joking. The first time she came to my property, she told me the low southeastern corner of my land was actually a drainage easement belonging to Calderwood Pines. She had a paper with her. It had stamps. It had lines. It had language that sounded legal enough to scare someone who did not know better. I glanced at it for maybe 4 seconds. Then I handed it back. "Darinda," I said, "my grandfather's deed includes that corner. No easement, no exception, no shared use. Tell your lawyer to check the county records before you come back out here." She smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, just smiled like someone writing down your name for later. Then she left. I stood in my driveway after her Escalade disappeared down the road, watching the dust settle over the cedar brake. Something about the quiet felt wrong. A man who has spent 40 years around engines learns to recognize trouble before the breakdown happens. Sometimes it is not a bang. Sometimes it is a faint knock under the hood. A vibration that should not be there. A smell of heat where there should be none. That morning I felt the same thing in my chest. Not panic. Not anger. Attention. 3 weeks later, the excavators arrived. 2 of them. Sitting on my southeastern corner at 7 in the morning. Diesel engines rumbling. Buckets raised. Orange stakes driven into ground my grandfather had cleared before Darinda Yansy was born. I walked down to the fence line and met the foreman. His name was Bryce. Sunburned face. Hard hat. Polite enough. The kind of man who did not know he had been hired into someone else's lie. He shook my hand and spread a set of stamped engineering drawings across the hood of his truck. "Mr. Wolfson," he said, "we've got a permitted project here. County approved. Survey's been done." I looked at the drawings. Then I looked past him at the machines. Then back at the drawings. "Who filed the permit application?" I asked. "The HOA hired the surveyor," he said. "Dunleavy's office handled the county submission." "And did anyone pull the actual deed on this parcel before you broke ground?" Bryce paused. Just once. That pause told me more than his answer. "That's not really my department." "No," I said. "It isn't." And I meant it. Bryce was not my enemy. He was a working man doing a job with papers someone else had handed him. I had no interest in yelling at the man who had been sent to dig. So I memorized the company name. I noted the contractor license number. I shook his hand again. Then I went back to the house. That afternoon I called my cousin Harlan Duback. Harlan had spent 40 years working title records. His mind worked like an old courthouse index. You gave him a parcel number, and he could pull history out of it like a mechanic pulling a bad part from an engine. I gave him everything. My deed, Darinda's easement claim, the permit number Bryce had shown me, the HOA paperwork, the survey reference. 20 minutes later, Harlan called back. He did not waste words. "Garrett," he said, "they built on your land. Full stop." What he found was small enough to look accidental and big enough to destroy Darinda's entire claim. A transposed parcel number. 2 digits switched on the permit application. 2 digits. That was all it took to move the approved construction zone 90 feet. And 90 feet was exactly enough to shift the pool from HOA common area straight onto the southeastern corner of the Wolfson parcel. Some people hear that and think, that's just a typo. It was not just a typo. Not in property law. A wrong legal description can make a permit worthless. The county had stamped a document based on land the applicant did not own. That meant the approval did not give them rights over my property. It meant the excavators were trespassing. It meant every scoop of soil they moved made the problem worse. Now this is where some men would storm down there shouting, threatening, demanding the machines shut off. I understand that instinct. I really do. But I have fixed too many engines to start swinging a wrench before I know exactly what broke. When something fails, you document first. Because once people realize they have made a serious mistake, evidence has a strange way of disappearing. So I did not yell. I documented. I borrowed a trail camera from my neighbor Cliff and mounted it where it could see the construction site. Then I walked the fence line with my phone recording. Every stake, every tire track, every bucket mark, every broken patch of soil. I narrated slowly, clearly, boringly, because boring footage wins court cases. Then I went to the barn. Under my workbench, behind a stack of hydraulic fittings and an old coffee can full of bolts, sits a fireproof lockbox. When I opened it, the smell rose out motor oil, old paper, dust, and time. Inside were the things my family had trusted more than memory. My grandfather's deed, my father's probate records, the 1962 survey. That survey is drawn in ink on linen paper, faded the color of weak tea. The corner pins are marked with tiny crosses. In the margin beside the southeast corner, My grandfather had penciled his initials. A. V. Right where Darinda's excavators were digging. I held that paper up to the light for a long time. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote Darinda Yansy, a certified letter. Calm. Factual. No threats. No insults. No drama. I informed her that construction had begun on private property without consent, that the encroachment had been documented, and that I was requesting an immediate halt pending title review. Copies went to the county commissioner's office and the state attorney general's consumer protection division. I thought that would slow things down. It did not. 3 days later, the HOA's attorney sent me an 8-page letter. Dense. Polished. Aggressive. Their argument was that my land was subject to something called an implied easement by prior use because rainwater had historically drained through the low corner of my property. According to them, because water had run across that land, the HOA had somehow earned the right to build a swimming pool there. I read the letter twice. Then I set it on the kitchen table and looked out the window. I had seen bad arguments before, but I had never seen someone try to turn a drainage ditch into a deed. That was when I called Vera Ashcraft. Vera was the most feared real estate litigation attorney in Kerr County. 5'4", sharp eyes, old pickup truck, voice calm enough to make dangerous people nervous. She once made a county tax assessor cry on the witness stand and considered it an ordinary Tuesday. I sent her everything. The deed, the survey, the HOA claim, the permit, the transposed parcel number, the letter from the attorney. 48 hours later, she called. Her voice had gone quiet. I would later learn that when Vera went quiet, it meant she was already 3 moves ahead. They cited implied easement by prior use? She asked. They did. In Texas? Yes. There was a pause. Not confusion. Amusement. Garrett, she said. Implied easements here are narrow. Very narrow. Rainwater crossing a low corner of private ranch land does not give an HOA the right to pour concrete on it. Her response letter was 12 pages. Not emotional, not loud, just precise. She demanded the HOA cease construction claims, produce the permit records, identify every person involved in the survey process, and preserve all board communications under litigation hold. I asked her what that meant. It means, Vera said, they are not allowed to shred, delete, alter, or lose anything related to this pool. Then she added, based on what you've told me, that is probably going to become very inconvenient for somebody. The pool opened the following June. They had a ribbon cutting, oversized scissors, sundresses, children smiling, a photographer, Darinda standing in front of the blue-green water like she had personally dragged it out of the Texas limestone. The HOA newsletter called it a proud moment for the community. There was a picture of Darinda under the pergola lights, smiling like a queen at her coronation, and I watched it all from the other side of the fence. Not because I accepted it, because I was waiting. 2 weeks after the opening, a bill arrived in my mailbox. Calderwood Pines Homeowners Association Community Amenity Maintenance Assessment. Total due, 1,847. My proportionate share, they called it. As an adjacent property owner benefiting from community infrastructure, I read that line 3 times. Then I sat down. Not because I was shocked exactly, because there are levels of arrogance that require a man to pause and make sure he is still living in the same world as everyone else. They had built a pool on my land, and then they billed me to maintain it. Attached to the bill was another legal letter. This one cited a section of the original development agreement, Section 31F. According to the HOA, the board had authority to extend community services to adjacent parcels and bill those property owners retroactively, whether I consented or not. I forwarded the letter to Vera. She called back in less than an hour. This time, she was not amused. She was certain. Garrett, she said, I read Section 31F 4 times. You know what they skipped? What? The part right before the sentence they quoted. Written consent of the adjacent parcel owner. I said nothing. She continued, your signature. They needed your signature. They never got it. Which means this bill is not just wrong, it is fraudulent. By Thursday afternoon, the HOA attorney had Vera's response. By Thursday evening, every board member's car was parked outside Darinda Yancy's house. I know because Phyllis Carnehan texted me a picture. Phyllis lived 2 lots from the pool and had been quietly furious with the HOA for 3 years. Her husband was on the landscape committee, and he reported back to her with the loyalty of a man who understood which side of his marriage was safest. According to Phyllis, the board's conclusion that night was simple. Hold firm. Garrett Wolfson is a retired mechanic. The HOA has a $340,000 legal defense reserve. He will fold before we do. On paper, I understand why they believe that. They saw me in my work shirt, standing by a fence. They saw an old ranch truck. They saw cattle. They saw dust. They saw a man who did not shout, did not posture, did not threaten, and they mistook quiet for weakness. What they did not know was that when my father died in 2009, he left behind a life insurance payout. I invested it the week after the funeral. Then I left it alone. For 16 years, I checked it 4 times a year and never touched it. No vacations. No new truck. No clever investments. Just patience. By the time Darinda sent that bill, that account held a little over $310,000. So no, I was not richer than the HOA. But I was not helpless. And I had something better than a defense fund. I had the truth. When the legal letters did not scare me away, Darinda changed tactics. She stopped trying to beat me with documents and started trying to bury me with opinion. She knew how neighborhoods worked. She knew how fast a story could spread when people heard only the part that made them angry. So she created a version of events where I was the villain. Garrett Wolfson, the bitter rancher next door, was trying to shut down the children's pool. Garrett Wolfson hated the community. Garrett Wolfson was jealous, difficult, spiteful. She did not mention that the pool was on my land. She did not mention the false permit. She did not mention the bill. She did not mention my certified letter. She simply asked the neighborhood Facebook group a question. Should our pool remain open for our families? 93% voted yes. Of course they did. That was like asking people if they enjoyed sunshine. Darinda screenshotted the poll and sent it to the HOA attorney as evidence of community support. To his credit, even he did not use a Facebook poll in court. Then she called the county. She suggested my cattle operation might be violating odor and noise ordinances. No neighbor had complained. No report had been filed. Just Darinda, making a careful phone call, hoping an officer at my gate would rattle me. The county sent Dale Strunk. Dale was weathered, slow-moving, and smart enough to recognize a nuisance complaint before he stepped out of his truck. He walked my fence line, checked the cattle, looked at the water systems, made notes. Then he wrote in his report that my property was in full compliance. The cattle were well maintained, and no violations were observed. Before he left, he leaned against his truck and said, without quite looking at me, "I've gotten calls like this before. Usually tells me more about the caller than the property." Then he drove off, dust rising behind him. I liked Dale Strunk immediately. By then, Vera had moved us into discovery. Discovery is not dramatic from the outside. No shouting, no big speeches, no sudden courtroom reveal. It is documents, emails, minutes, contracts, massage, permits, invoices. It looks boring, but for people who have done wrong, discovery is where the walls start closing in. The HOA was required to produce everything related to the pool project. Board minutes, construction contracts, survey communications, permit correspondence, internal emails, all of it, under oath. They produced the documents 8 days late. That did not surprise Vera. What did surprise her was what she found in the county permit records she had pulled independently, because Vera Ashcraft does not wait for opposing counsel to hand her the weapon. She called me one afternoon and read one email aloud, slowly, carefully, like she wanted to be certain I heard every word. It was from Darinda Yansy to the HOA's surveyor 6 weeks before the permit was filed. "We need that southeast corner included. If we pull the pins and restake it, the drainage argument should hold. Pull the pins." I sat there with the phone against my ear. For a second, I did not breathe. My grandfather's iron survey pins, driven into the earth in 1962, recorded in county documents, still marking the land after 6 decades of weather, cattle, drought, and time. Someone had gone out to my southeastern corner and pulled them from the ground. Not by mistake. Not because they were confused. Because Darinda wanted the land moved on paper before she took it in concrete. That was the moment this stopped being an HOA dispute in my mind. That was the moment it became something colder. Because land is not just land when it is the last thing your people left you. And a boundary pin is not just iron when your grandfather put it there with his own hands. Vera was quiet on the phone. Then she said, "Garrett, this changes everything." But the documents were not finished speaking. Buried in the board minutes from the night the HOA approved the pool project was a recorded objection from one board member. 4 votes in favor, 1 against. The objection read, "I want it noted that the southeast boundary has not been verified against the Wolfson deed, and I am not comfortable proceeding." The board member's name was Carol Fenn. She had resigned 2 months later. When Vera called her, Carol answered on the second ring, like she had been waiting. Carol lived 4 streets over from my property. Her kitchen table was scarred wood, the kind that had seen bills, meals, arguments, and decisions. A coffee pot ran all day on the counter. She sat across from Vera and me with a manila folder in front of her. Organized, labeled, dated, ready. She slid it across the table. "I've had this for 4 months," she said. "I was waiting for someone with standing to sue." Inside was the first real crack in Darinda's kingdom. A development agreement amendment had been recorded quietly at the county clerk's office on a Friday afternoon in January. It expanded HOA authority. It included the same service area extension language they had used to bill me. But according to Carol, who had once worked as a county clerk, that kind of amendment required a proper member vote. Notice. Meeting. 2/3 approval. The full process. Darinda had skipped all of it. The amendment had been signed by only 2 people. Darinda Yansy, and Prescott Dunleavy. That meant the billing, the service area claim, the easement theory. All of it rested on a document that never should have had legal effect in the first place. Then Carol reached into the back of the folder. "This," she said quietly, "is the part you need to see." It was a real estate purchase option between Prescott Dunleavy and a holding company called Caldera Acquisitions LLC. The agreement gave Caldera the option to buy certain HOA common areas, including the aquatic center, at far below market value, but only if the aquatic center was fully constructed and operational. I read the document once, then twice. Then I looked at the registered agent for Caldera Acquisitions LLC, Darinda Yansy. The kitchen went silent. Outside, a mockingbird sang like nothing important had happened. But something had, because now we could see the whole machine. Darinda had pushed through an illegal amendment, used it to justify building a pool on land she did not own, let the HOA members fund the project through their dues, tried to bill me for it, then positioned a company connected to her to buy the finished asset at a discount. The neighborhood thought they were getting a community pool. Darinda was building herself an exit. My $1,847 bill was not a mistake. It was a piece of the scheme. Vera set her pen down. I had never seen her do that in the middle of a conversation. She looked at me across Carol Fenn's kitchen table and said, "Garrett, this is not just a property dispute anymore." She was right. We had walked in with a land case. We walked out with evidence of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, survey tampering, and enough paper to make the district attorney pay attention. Carol refilled the coffee. Nobody spoke for a while, and I remember thinking about my grandfather's initials on that old linen survey. A. V. Small letters. Faded pencil. Still stronger than every lie Darinda Yansy had printed on official letterhead. I did not go home and post about it. I did not call reporters. I did not stand at the fence and shout. I went home, fed the cattle, checked the water, closed the barn. Then I opened the lockbox again and placed Carol's copies beside my grandfather's deed. Not because I needed to hide them, because that box held the truth of my land. And the truth had just gotten heavier. Before you leave, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments which city or country you're watching from. The next morning, Vera made the first call. Not to the HOA, not to Darinda, not to the board. She called the Kerr County District Attorney's office. And when Vera Ashcraft calls a district attorney, she does not call to ask whether something looks suspicious. She calls when the paper trail is already sitting in order, sharpened, labeled, and ready to cut. The investigator assigned to the matter was Morton Gillespie. He was the kind of man who did not speak just to fill silence. Slow voice, careful questions, no dramatic promises, no outrage for show. He listened the way a good mechanic listens to a bad engine, not for the loudest noise, but for the sound underneath it that tells you where the real damage is. Vera walked him through everything. The original Wolfson deed, the 1962 survey, the transposed parcel number, the construction permit, the HOA letters, the fraudulent bill, the illegal amendment, Carol Fenn's folder, and finally the email. We need that southeast corner included. If we pull the pins and restake it, the drainage argument should hold. Morton asked Vera to read that line again. She did. Then there was a pause on the call. A long one. Not because Morton did not understand, because he understood too well. Survey pins are not casual objects. They are not decorations. They are not fence scraps. They are legal markers tied to recorded property descriptions. Moving them, removing them, or manipulating them to create a false boundary is not a neighborhood disagreement. It is evidence. And evidence like that has a way of changing the temperature in a room. Morton did not promise charges that day. Men like him do not. He simply said, "Send me everything." Vera did. Then, she filed the quiet title action. A quiet title lawsuit is not flashy. It does not sound like revenge. It does not make good gossip. But in land disputes, it is one of the most powerful tools a property owner has. It asks the court to decide, permanently and on the public record, who owns a specific piece of land. Not who wants it. Not who uses it. Not who built something on it. Who owns it? Once a quiet title judgment is entered, it gets recorded in the county deed records. It follows the land. It answers the question so clearly that no board president, no developer, no attorney, and no future buyer can pretend confusion later. And my paper trail was clean. My grandfather's 1951 deed, the recorded chain of title, the 1962 survey, the iron pin locations, my father's probate records, the title insurance policy from 1988 that I had found folded inside the lockbox, 73 years of ownership, no HOA signature, no covenant, no consent, no easement, no sale, no transfer, just land that had always been ours. Vera filed the quiet title action on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, the HOA attorney had been served. By Tuesday evening, Darinda Yansy knew the fight had moved somewhere she could not control with Facebook polls and certified letters. That was when I made my own call. I called Cliff Drowski. Cliff was 64, ran a septic pumping and excavation business, and had been my friend for more than 30 years. Years ago, after a bad season, his pickup engine gave out, and he did not have the money for a full shop repair. I rebuilt it for him at cost. He never forgot it. Cliff is the kind of man who does not speak much about loyalty because he is too busy practicing it. He answered on the second ring. I told him what the court filing was. Then I told him what I planned to do if the judge confirmed what we already knew. There was a long silence. Then Cliff said, "You want the big truck?" "I do. I do." He laughed once. Not loud. Just enough. "Then you'll have it." Cliff's pump truck was a bright yellow Vector unit with a diesel engine that sounded like it had swallowed thunder. It could move thousands of gallons an hour without complaint. Septic tanks, floodwater, construction pits. That machine did not care what kind of liquid stood in its way. And the pool on my land held about 21,000 gallons. Give or take. Cliff came over that evening. We sat at my kitchen table with coffee, legal pads, measurements, and the kind of calm planning that people mistake for anger until they see the result. The plan was simple, not reckless, not destructive, not illegal, simple. Once the court confirmed my title to the land and all improvements on it, the pool would be mine. Not the HOA's, not Darinda's, mine. And if it was mine, I could do with it what any rancher does with unwanted water sitting in the wrong place. Drain it. Cliff would bring the pump truck through my southeast gate. We would pull the drain covers, run the hose, remove every gallon, load by load, until the expensive community pool was an empty concrete shell sitting under a pergola on ranch land. Then we would remove the filtration equipment and anything else that belonged to the system. Not out of rage, out of practicality. A swimming pool requires chemicals, insurance, maintenance, liability, inspections, and people who think blue water makes them entitled to trespass. I did not need a pool. I had cattle, and cattle need water. So from a farm supply co-op in Fredericksburg, I ordered a commercial livestock waterer, 100 gallons. Automatic refill. Heavy-duty body. Built for Texas heat. The kind of equipment designed to last longer than most committees. We would bolt it directly into the shallow end, plumb it to my well line, and string a low-voltage electric fence around the coping to keep the cattle from stepping where they should not. The pergola could stay. It made shade. Darinda had wanted a luxury amenity. I was going to turn it into the most expensive cattle trough in Kerr County. While Cliff and I handled the practical side, Vera escalated the legal side. She filed a civil RICO claim. Most people hear RICO and think of organized crime, but civil RICO can apply to a coordinated pattern of fraud conducted through an enterprise. And what Darinda, Dunleavy, the holding company, and the manipulated HOA process had created looked less like a mistake and more like a machine. Illegal amendment, false permit, survey manipulation, member-funded construction, self-connected purchase option, fraudulent billing, pattern, enterprise, money, land, control. Vera was not filing it for decoration. She was sending a message. No cheap settlement. No quiet apology. No, let's all move forward. The HOA attorney received the RICO filing on a Thursday. Phyllis Carnehan later told me the board meeting that night lasted until almost midnight. Lights on, cars outside, curtains closed. And for the first time, according to her husband, nobody at that table sounded confident. That same week, Phyllis started organizing. Not loudly, not publicly, quietly. One phone call at a time. She reached out to homeowners who had been asking questions for years and getting polished nonsense in response. Where did the reserve money go? Why had dues increased? Why were board votes rushed? Why had Carol Fenn resigned? Why had the pool cost more than originally announced? Why was the rancher next door being blamed for a project the HOA had never fully explained? By the end of the week, Phyllis had 61 homeowners on a list. She called it the Interested Parties List. I called it what it was. The beginning of the end for Darinda Yansy. Darinda was not the kind of person who waited quietly while the floor cracked under her. When she saw the quiet title action in the public records, she started what I can only describe as administrative warfare. Her first move was to attack my livelihood. She contacted Wade Pelton, a livestock broker in San Antonio I had worked with for 9 years. Wade is not dramatic. He is not easily rattled. He makes his living reading people across sale barns and cattle lots, which means he knows the difference between concern and manipulation. Darinda told him, carefully, that I was involved in litigation that might affect the long-term viability of my property as a cattle operation. She did not quite say I was unstable. She did not quite say the land was at risk. She just placed the suggestion in the air like poison and hoped it would spread. Wade called me the same afternoon. He repeated her words exactly. Then he said, "Garrett, I just wanted you to know we're not going anywhere." I thanked him, wrote down the time of the call, forwarded the notes to Vera, because when someone is digging their own hole, you do not interrupt. You measure the depth. Then came the countersuit. The HOA claimed my quiet title action was tortious interference with their established operations. They also claimed I owed them $217,000 for unjust enrichment because I had supposedly benefited from community infrastructure. Infrastructure they had built on my land without permission. It was an impressive document only in the sense that a paper airplane is impressive for staying in the air for 3 seconds before hitting the floor. Vera read it and called me. I could hear the smile in her voice. "They're spending their defense fund," she said. "Is that bad for us?" "No," she said. "Let them." Darinda's next move was the press. That was predictable. People like Darinda love official language until the official language turns against them. Then they run to public sympathy. She contacted the Calderwood Courier, the local weekly paper, and pitched a story about a reclusive rancher trying to destroy a beloved family pool. That was the version she wanted printed. A lonely old man, a happy neighborhood, children losing their summer, a community under attack. But the reporter assigned to the story was named Stevie Brandt. Stevie was 26, sharp, and trained in data journalism. She did not treat public records like boring paperwork. She treated them like a map. She called residents. She called Carol Fenn. She called Vera. She pulled the permit application herself. Then she pulled the LLC registration. Then the amendment. Then the option agreement. Then the parcel records. Stevie Brandt did not write the story Darinda pitched. She wrote the story the documents told, and the documents told an ugly story. The piece did not end up running only in the Calderwood Courier. The San Antonio Express-News picked it up on a tip. That headline was not the one Darinda wanted. By the second paragraph, the word scheme had appeared. That changed everything. Before the article, Darinda controlled the neighborhood story. After the article, the county was reading along. Residents who had believed her started asking different questions. People who had stayed quiet started forwarding emails. Board members who had nodded along in private started remembering concerns they had apparently forgotten to write down. And Morton Gillespie, the district attorney's investigator, kept working. Quietly, methodically, he traced the survey pins. That sounds impossible until you understand how construction sites work. Things removed from the ground do not always vanish. Sometimes they get tossed aside. Sometimes they end up behind a staging area. Sometimes the person who thought he was hiding evidence does not realize that old iron with dried caliche still stuck to one end looks very different from new scrap. Morton found one of the original 1,962 pins in a pile of fencing debris behind the contractor's staging area, pulled from the ground. Still dirty, still real, still capable of speaking after all those years. He had it photographed, tagged, and entered into evidence. Then he subpoenaed the surveyor's phone records. The surveyor's name was Tad Beauchamp, 44 years old, licensed for 20 years. Mortgage. Kids in private school. A career built on one credential that could disappear in a single hearing. When Morton sat across from Tad and placed the evidence in front of him, the email, the pin, the calls, the altered survey work, Tad made the decision people make when the truth has already arrived before them. He cooperated, fully. He produced emails, instructions, drafts, marked copies, everything he had been asked to alter. Then he signed a written statement. In that statement, he named the person who told him exactly where to restake the southeastern boundary, Darinda Yansy. Vera called me the evening she learned about the statement. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "It's over for her," she said. I looked out my kitchen window toward the dark line of cedar. "Does she know that?" "No," Vera said. "Not yet. That weekend, I did what I always do when something important is out of my hands. I worked, fed the cattle at 6:15. Checked the troughs, greased a hinge on the north gate, walked the fence line, repaired a cracked fitting, sharpened a blade I did not need sharpened. The mind needs work when waiting becomes too heavy. Late October had put an edge in the air. Morning cool, afternoon warm, cedar holding green where the grass had gone tired. The kind of Texas weather that makes you think the land is resting with one eye open. I walked the southeastern corner last. The pool sat behind the chain-link fence, blue-green and still. The pergola lights were off. The water did not move. A pool can look innocent when you do not know what it cost. Not money. Truth. Time. Peace. Trust. The land around it looked disturbed in a way that still bothered me. Not because concrete sat there. Concrete can be broken, removed, repurposed, forgotten, but because someone had believed they could move my grandfather's boundary with a lie and make the lie permanent by pouring money over it. I stood there a long while. Cliff had already serviced the pump truck. The livestock waterer was on order. The hoses were checked. The fittings were ready. I had measured the pool and calculated the water loads. 21,000 gallons. 4 loads. 5 hours. Weather depending. Everything was ready. All I needed was Judge Doris Wayfraft's signature. 3 days before the hearing, Darinda sent someone to my porch. Not herself this time. She sent a consultant named Russ Halperin. Clean shirt. Rental car. Professional smile. The kind of man hired to deliver bad news in a friendly tone. He carried a settlement offer. And to someone who did not understand the whole picture, it might have looked reasonable. The HOA would deed back control of the 0.8-acre parcel. They would drop the countersuit. They would pay $25,000 in good faith compensation. In exchange, I would sign a full release of all claims, quiet title, civil RICO, damages, and most importantly, I would stop cooperating with the criminal investigation. Russ read it carefully. Then he waited. I let the silence sit between us. The porch boards were warm under my boots. The evening smelled like cedar and dry grass. Finally, I said, "No." "No." Russ blinked. "That's the response?" "That's the response." Is there a counteroffer you'd like me to bring back? No counter. He studied me for a second like he was trying to decide whether I understood what I was turning down. I understood perfectly. $25,000 was not a settlement. It was hush money wearing a clean shirt. And I was not for sale. Russ nodded once, walked back to his rental car, and drove away. The dust hung in the air after him. I watched until his taillights disappeared. Then I went inside and turned off the porch light. Darinda's next move was either brave or desperate. Maybe both. She went to Commissioner Ray Bledsoe. Ray had maintained friendly relations with Prescott Dunleavy's development interests for years. He liked ribbon cuttings, growth, tax base, and the kind of progress that photographs well. Darinda pushed for an emergency resolution declaring the pool a public safety infrastructure asset. The goal was obvious. If the county could muddy the issue, if they could call the pool something bigger than an HOA amenity, they might delay the court, confuse the public, and buy time. Legally, it was weak. Politically, it might have worked. Except Stevie Brandt's article had run that morning. By the time Darinda walked into Bledsoe's office, his phone had already been ringing for hours. Constituent. Reporters. Residents. Angry homeowners. People asking why a county commissioner was anywhere near a dispute involving false permits, survey tampering, and an HOA board president's private company. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. There was no resolution. There was no press conference. There was no rescue. Commissioner Bledsoe later told an aide it was the shortest meeting of his political career. 2 days before the hearing, the HOA filed a motion to continue. They asked for 60 more days. They claimed newly relevant discovery. It was their last stall tactic. Judge Doris Waycraft denied it in less than 24 hours. The hearing would happen as scheduled. The day before court, I woke before sunrise. I made coffee too strong and slightly burned, the way I like it. Fed the cattle at 6:15. Walked the water lines. Checked the southeast gate. Then I stood near the pool fence in the long morning light. 11 months. 11 months since Darinda had stood on my porch and told me to sign. 11 months of letters. Claims. Inspections. Smears. Bills. Facebook polls. Board meetings. Legal filings. A settlement offer that treated fraud like a misunderstanding. For 11 months I had been called difficult, bitter, unreasonable, against the community. A problem, but I had learned something long ago. When people steal from you, they almost always want the right to name your reaction. If you object, you are angry. If you defend yourself, you are selfish. If you refuse to be bullied, you are difficult. And if you win, they say you went too far. So I stopped caring what Darinda called me. I knew what I was, a man standing on his own land. That was enough. Phyllis had confirmed 61 homeowners would be in court the next morning. Not to shout, not to disrupt, just to be seen. Carol Fenn would testify. Tad Beauchamp would testify. Morton Gillespie would sit in the back. Stevie Brandt would be there with her notebook. A wire service photographer would be beside her. And Cliff's pump truck was parked in my equipment barn, fully fueled, fully serviced, ready to roll the moment I called. Everything had become very quiet, not peaceful, ready. That night, I opened the lockbox one more time. I looked at my grandfather's deed, at the survey, at the penciled initials, A.V. I wondered what Earl Wolfson would have done if a woman with a clipboard had told him his land belonged to a committee. Probably less paperwork than I had used, possibly more profanity. But I think he would have understood the waiting, the patience, the refusal to be moved. Because land teaches a man a certain kind of stubbornness, not the loud kind, the rooted kind. The next morning, Judge Doris Waycraft took the bench at 9 a.m. The courtroom was fuller than anyone expected for a civil property hearing. 61 Calderwood Pines homeowners sat in the gallery. Young parents, retirees, couples, people who had paid dues for years believing their board was protecting them, not using them. Stevie Brandt sat in the third row. The photographer sat beside her. Morton Gillespie sat near the back in plain clothes, hands folded, expression unreadable. Darinda sat at the defense table in a burgundy blazer. Her reading glasses hung from a beaded chain. Her attorney leaned toward her and whispered now and then. She did not look at the gallery. Not once. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Vera presented the deed chain back to 1,951, the 1,962 survey, The title examination, the permit with the false parcel description, the HOA's letters, the fraudulent bill, Carol's documents, the illegal amendment, the LLC connection, Tad Beauchamp's written statement, and then Exhibit Q, the email. If we pull the pins and restake it, the drainage argument should hold. The courtroom changed when Vera read that line aloud. You could feel it. Even people who did not understand property law understood that. Pull the pins. Restake it. Make the land look different. Make the lie look official. Darinda's attorney argued implied easement. Community benefit. Reliance. Equity. Established operations. He did his job. He was professional. He was thorough. But he was standing on a bridge that had already burned behind him. Judge Waycraft listened, asked questions, reviewed the documents. Then, at 12:17 p.m., she read her ruling from the bench. The HOA had no valid easement over the Wolfson parcel. The permit was void as applied because it was issued using a false property description. The 2023 amendment was improperly executed and void. Garrett Wolfson held clear fee, simple title to the 0.8-acre southeastern parcel, including all improvements thereon, including the swimming pool. The HOA was ordered to cease all operations on my property immediately, remove all signage and equipment within 30 days, and stop claiming any ownership, easement, service right, or assessment authority over the land. The gallery did not cheer. It exhaled. 61 people letting go of the same breath. Darinda sat still. For the first time since I had met her, she had no clipboard, no motion, no poll, no letter, no room to control. Vera touched my arm once. I looked straight ahead, and in that moment, I did not feel victory. Not exactly. I felt confirmation. The court had not given me anything. It had simply said aloud what had always been true. The land was mine. By 2 p.m., Cliff Drowski's pump truck was backed up to the pool deck. Bright yellow. Diesel rumbling. 4-inch hoses coiled and ready. Cliff stepped down from the cab and gave me a nod. No speech. No performance. Just a nod between two men who knew what the next 5 hours meant. We pulled the drain covers. Cliff started the pump, and the former Calderwood Pines Community Aquatic Center began to empty. At first, the sound was a deep gurgle, then a heavy rush, then the steady mechanical pull of thousands of gallons moving through hose and steel and diesel power. The water level dropped slowly at first. Then, visibly, tile, bitile, inch by inch, the smell changed as the pool emptied. Sharp chlorine at the surface, then wet concrete, limestone, minerals, that cold bottom smell every standing body of water has when it finally gives up what it was hiding. Residents stood along the lawful side of the fence and watched. Some quiet, some stunned, some filming. Stevie Brandt took notes. The photographer took pictures. Nobody from the old board said a word. 4 loads, 5 hours. By 7 p.m., the pool was no longer blue. It was gray concrete under evening light. Damp, empty, expensive, pointless. Mine. The pergola threw a long shadow across the shallow end. The cafe lights Darinda had chosen hung still in the warm air. Cliff shut off the pump. For a moment, the sudden silence felt louder than the machine had. I walked to the edge and looked down into the empty shell. 11 months of lies had held water. Now they held nothing. The next morning, Cliff and I came back with the livestock waterer. 100 gallons. Heavy duty. Automatic refill. A practical piece of equipment sitting in the middle of a place that had been built for appearances. We drilled into the concrete floor of the shallow end, bolted it down, plumbed it into my well line, checked the pressure. It filled clean and fast. Good water. Cold enough. Reliable. Then I strung a single low-voltage electric line around the coping. Nothing dramatic, just enough to tell cattle where not to step. By noon, the work was done. I opened the southeast gate. 6 Hereford cattle came through. They did not care about HOA politics. They did not care about court orders. They did not care about Darinda's newsletter photo. They cared about water. They walked down into the shallow end, lowered their heads, and drank. Slow, steady, peaceful. The sound echoed off the concrete walls and under the pergola. That was the first honest use that structure had ever had. Stevie Brandt's photograph ran nationally by the next afternoon. It was not a complicated photograph. No dramatic pose. No shouting. No broken glass. No police tape. Just me standing near the edge of a drained concrete pool in a faded work shirt, my boots dusty, my hands at my sides, while 6 Hereford cattle drank calmly from a livestock waterer, bolted into what had once been the shallow end of the Calderwood Pines Community Aquatic Center. Behind them, the pergola still stood. The string lights still hung. The decorative posts still cast a soft shadow over the concrete. Everything Darinda had chosen to make the place look like a luxury amenity was still there. Only the meaning had changed. The caption did not need much. Former Calderwood Pines Community Aquatic Center, Kerr County, Texas. That was enough. By evening, the photo had been shared across local news pages, ranching groups, HOA complaint forums, property rights pages, and more neighborhood Facebook groups than I could count. Some people laughed. Some people argued. Some people called it petty. Some called it justice. A few said I should have been more forgiving. Those people, I noticed, were never the ones whose land had been taken. The thing about public attention is that people think it gives them ownership of a story. They see one photo and decide they understand 11 months of letters, lies, stress, legal fees, false claims, and old iron pins pulled out of the ground. They do not. A photograph can show a result. It cannot show what it cost to get there. That evening, I did not watch the coverage. I did not refresh articles. I did not read comments. I sat on the back step with a cup of coffee and listened to the cattle move in the dark. The land had gone quiet again. Not silent. Land is never silent if you know how to hear it. There was wind in the cedar. A gate chain clicking faintly. A night bird somewhere near the fence line. Water refilling in the new trough with a soft, steady sound. For the first time in almost a year, the southeastern corner felt like it belonged to itself again. 2 weeks later, Calderwood Pines held a special HOA meeting. Phyllis Carnehan's group called it under the HOA's own bylaws, which gave members the right to demand a meeting if enough homeowners signed. Darinda had used those bylaws for years like weapons. Now the members used them like tools. 75 homeowners attended. Some came angry. Some came embarrassed. Some came quiet, carrying folders full of printed emails and dues notices they had once ignored. Darinda did not attend. That surprised some people. It did not surprise me. Darinda liked rooms she could control. This was no longer one of them. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, the same building where the board had once held fundraisers and pool planning nights, under cheerful banners about family, safety, and summer memories. Now those same walls heard something different. Question. Real questions. Why was the amendment never put to a member vote? Who authorized the pool expenditure? Why was the reserve fund used without proper approval? Why was Garrett Wolfson billed? Why were residents told he was attacking the neighborhood when the board already knew there was a title issue? Why did Darinda's company have an option to purchase HOA property? Why had Carol Fenn's objection been buried? Phyllis stood near the front with her list. Carol Fenn sat at the table beside the acting secretary. People who had never spoken at meetings before stood and spoke. A young father said he had defended Darinda online because he thought she was protecting the pool for his children. Then he apologized to the room, not because anyone demanded it, but because he needed to say aloud that he had believed the wrong person. A retired accountant asked why no independent audit had been ordered when pool costs exceeded the original estimate. A woman who lived near the clubhouse said she had asked about reserve spending twice and had been told she was creating division. Carol listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not perform. She took notes. Then the motion came. Removal of Darinda Yansy from the board. The vote was 71-4. 71-4. Just like that, the Queen of Calderwood Pines lost her kingdom without even appearing to defend it. The second motion elected Carol Fenn as interim board president. That passed almost unanimously. Carol's first official action was not dramatic. That is why I respected it. She moved that the HOA formally acknowledge the unlawful construction on the Wolfson property, cease all disputed claims permanently, and cooperate fully with any civil or criminal investigation. Passed. Her second motion was to initiate a full independent financial audit of the HOA reserve fund. Passed. Her third motion was to notify members in writing of all legal exposure created by the prior board's actions. Passed. By the end of that meeting, Calderwood Pines had not fixed everything. But it had done something important. It had stopped pretending. I did not attend. Phyllis asked me if I wanted to. I told her no. That meeting belonged to the homeowners. They were the ones who had to decide what kind of neighborhood they wanted after the lies ran out. I was home. The cattle were settled. The pool, if anyone still wanted to call it that, was doing useful work. The evening smelled of cedar, diesel, and clean well water. A week after Darinda was removed, the notices arrived from the Kerr County District Attorney's Office. Darinda Yansy and Prescott Dunleavy were being charged. Tampering with governmental records. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty. Tad Beauchamp, the surveyor, was charged separately. Those words looked dry on paper. Legal words often do. But inside them was the whole story. A false permit. A moved boundary. An HOA board used as a personal instrument. A community's money routed into a project tied to a private purchase option. A rancher billed for a pool built on land he never gave them. I read the notice once. Then I set it down. I had thought I might feel satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired. There is a special kind of exhaustion that comes when the truth finally catches up to people who made you carry it alone for months. You are glad it arrived, but you remember every day it was late. Darinda eventually pleaded no contest to tampering with governmental records. 3 years of deferred adjudication probation, $78,000 in restitution to the HOA Reserve Fund, and a permanent bar from serving on any HOA board in the state of Texas. That last part mattered more than people realized. Money can be repaid. Probation can end. But authority was what Darinda loved. The right to sign, stamp, demand, warn, and punish. That was taken from her. For a woman like Darinda, that was not a footnote. That was the sentence. Caldera Acquisitions LLC was dissolved. The purchase option agreement with Dunleavy was voided. Prescott Dunleavy paid a civil judgment of $165,000 and an additional fine. His cooperation with prosecutors was described in court documents as limited and reluctant. That phrase made Vera smile. Limited and reluctant, she said, is courthouse language, for he helped only after the wall touched his back. Dunleavy's reputation did not survive the coverage. Developers live on trust, permits, bank relationships, county cooperation, and the appearance that their paperwork is clean. Once his name was attached to a false parcel description, an illegal HOA amendment, and a self-dealing purchase option, doors that had opened for him for years started closing quietly. He did not break ground on another project in Kerr County, at least not under his own name. Tad Beauchamp lost his surveying license. He received 2 years of probation. He also sent me a written public apology. That surprised me. Not because I thought he was innocent. He was not. But because most people caught in a lie apologize only to the court, not to the person whose life they helped disturb. His letter was short. He admitted he had failed his profession. He admitted he had ignored what he knew was wrong. He admitted the boundary never should have been altered. I read it once. Then I folded it and put it in the fireproof lockbox beside my grandfather's deed. Not because it healed anything, because records matter. And one day, if someone opens that box after I am gone, they should see not only what was done to the land, but what finally had to be admitted. The HOA's countersuit was dismissed with prejudice. That meant it could not be brought again. The civil RICO claim settled confidentially. Vera never told me I could not talk about the number. The agreement did. So I will say only this. Vera Ashcraft got a new photograph framed in her office. In it, I am standing near the former pool with 6 cattle drinking behind me. She hung it above a filing cabinet labeled Cases where I was told to stand down. When I asked why, she said, "Best closing argument I never had to make." Commissioner Ray Bledsoe did not seek re-election. Officially, he said it was time to spend more time with family. That is what public men say when the ground starts making sounds under their feet. His primary challenger ran heavily on local accountability, property rights, and oversight of development relationships. She won by 11 points. At her victory speech, she did not mention my name. She did mention that public office should never be used as a broom to sweep private fraud under a rug. I liked that line. The Calderwood Pines audit took months. Carol Fenn insisted it be done properly. Not a quick review. Not a friendly accountant. A full independent audit. The final report confirmed what we had suspected. The HOA Reserve Fund had been depleted by more than $200,000 for the pool project, bypassing member approval requirements and disguising several expenditures under vague infrastructure categories. Some invoices were legitimate construction costs. Some were legal fees. Some were consulting expenses that looked cleaner at first glance than they did under a second one. The audit also found that members had been given incomplete budget summaries for 2 years. Not false enough to be obvious. Not clear enough to be honest. That is how people like Darinda operate. They do not always need a giant lie. Sometimes they use 1,000 small omissions, a missing attachment, a delayed notice, a partial quote, a vote scheduled when people are not paying attention, a document recorded on a Friday afternoon, an email worded carefully enough to sound administrative until someone reads it in court. The new board pursued recovery through the HOA's errors and omissions insurance policy. They recovered $140,000. Not everything, but enough to keep the association from collapsing. At the next full member meeting, the homeowners voted on what to do with part of the recovered money. That was Carol's idea. She said if the old board had hidden decisions, the new board should make decisions in daylight. A portion went back into the reserve. A portion covered legal and audit costs. And $60,000 was set aside to create the Calderwood Pines Educational Access Fund, a scholarship program for graduating seniors in the local school district. When Phyllis told me about it, I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was the first thing that had come out of the entire mess that felt clean. The first awards went to 2 students. One planned to study environmental engineering. The other planned to study agricultural law. I did not miss the irony. Neither did Vera. The scholarship ceremony was held at the clubhouse on a warm May evening. I did attend that one. Not for speeches, not for recognition. Just because Phyllis asked. And because sometimes when people try to rebuild something the right way, it is worth showing up. The pergola at the clubhouse had string lights too. Not Darinda's pool pergola. A different one. Cedar posts. Long tables. Food arranged with the serious precision Phyllis brought to every community event. There were casseroles, brisket sliders, tea, lemonade, and one sheet cake that made me stop walking when I saw it. Blue frosting, a cattle hoof print, and the words, "Know your pins." I looked at Phyllis. She looked back at me with the calm face of a woman who had absolutely done it on purpose. I did not ask questions. Some mysteries deserve to live. A few Calderwood Pines residents came up to me that evening. Some apologized. Some thanked me. Some did both awkwardly. One man said, "I thought you were trying to take something from us." I said, "I was trying to keep what was mine." He nodded. That was enough. I was not interested in making people crawl. Most of them had not been malicious. They had been misled. There is a difference. But being misled does not remove responsibility completely. A community that gives a board power also has to watch what the board does with it. That lesson cost Calderwood Pines a pool. It could have cost them more. As for the southeastern corner of my land, it looks different now and exactly the same. The concrete shell is still there. I looked into removing it once. The estimate made me close the email before I finished my coffee. So it stays. The cattle like it. The shallow end holds the waterer. The pergola provides shade during the hot months. Rainwater drains around it better than expected after Cliff and I cut a proper channel along the edge. The filtration equipment is gone. The pool rules sign is gone. The chain link fence is gone. No more hours of operation. No guest passes. No HOA notices. Just cattle, concrete, shade, water, and Texas sky. Every so often, someone driving the county road slows down near the fence. Sometimes they take a picture. Sometimes they point. Sometimes they laugh. I do not mind. The story belongs to the public now in the way stories do. But the land does not. That distinction is important. One October weekend, after the heat finally broke, I poured a narrow band of fresh concrete along part of the old pool coping. Not because it needed it, because I wanted to mark the place myself. Before it set, I pressed my boot prints into it. Then I walked one of the calmer Herefords across and let her leave hoof prints beside mine. A small permanent record. Man and animal. Work and land. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just true. In the northeast corner of that concrete band, I used an old metal stamp I found in the barn and pressed 2 letters into the surface. A. V. My grandfather's initials. Same corner of the parcel. Different medium. Same message. This is Wolfson land. It was never Darinda's. It was never Calderwood Pines's. It was never something to be claimed by typo, committee vote, fake amendment, or social pressure. It was ours. It is mine. And one day, if I do this right, it will pass clean to someone who understands what it means. People ask me sometimes if I regret draining the pool. The answer is no. Not because I enjoyed embarrassing anyone, not because I wanted children to lose a place to swim, not because I hate neighborhoods or HOAs or community projects. I do not. A properly run HOA can maintain roads, preserve shared spaces, organize repairs, and keep things fair. But an HOA is not a government. A board president is not a judge. A committee is not a deed. And community benefit does not erase private ownership. That is the part people forget when they fall in love with authority. They start with rules, then they move to pressure, then they move to punishment. Then, if nobody stops them, they start believing anything they can get away with is something they were entitled to do. Darinda believed that. She believed paperwork could become truth if stamped hard enough. She believed a false boundary could become real if concrete covered it. She believed a neighborhood could be turned against one man if she controlled the story. She believed money would outlast patience. She was wrong every time. The land did not move. The deed did not change. The pins still mattered, even after she had them pulled. And patience, real patience, is not weakness. It is pressure held in reserve. That is what my father taught me without ever saying it directly. When a fence breaks, you fix it. When a calf is stuck, you pull it. When an engine knocks, you listen before you wrench. And when someone with a clipboard tells you they own what your family bled into the soil, you do not have to scream. You just have to know where the papers are. You have to know what they say. And you have to be willing to let truth move slower than lies until the day it catches up. Because lies are fast. They run through Facebook groups, board meetings, newsletters, and polite conversations. They sound confident. They dress well. They use official letterhead. Truth is slower. Truth sits in courthouse records, old surveys, county files, faded ink, iron pins, probate documents, emails people thought nobody would read. Truth does not hurry because it does not need to. It only needs someone stubborn enough to carry it all the way. That was all I did. I did not defeat Darinda Yansy with rage. I defeated her with a deed, with records, with patience, with Vera Ashcraft, with Carol Fenn's folder, with Phyllis Carneahan's phone calls, with Morton Gillespie's evidence tags, with Cliff Drowski's pump truck, and with 6 Herefords who walked into the shallow end and drank like they had been waiting for their turn all along. Now, when the sun drops in late afternoon, the pergola throws a long shadow across the old pool shell. The cattle gather there. The waterer clicks on, fills, stops. The cedar moves in the wind. The concrete holds hoof prints, boot prints, and 2 stamped initials. Sometimes I stand there and think about that first morning on the porch. Darinda holding out her pen. Construction begins Monday. Sign here. I think about how close arrogance always stands to its own downfall. 1 signature. On typo. 1 pulled pin. 1 bill too many. That is all it took to expose everything. If she had stopped after the first letter, maybe this would have ended quietly. If she had admitted the permit mistake, maybe the pool never would have opened. If she had apologized and restored the land, maybe her name would have stayed out of the paper. If she had not billed me for maintaining the things she built on my property, maybe I would have settled for less. But people like Darinda do not stop when they are ahead. They stop when something stops them. In this case, it was a judge, a pump truck, and cattle. So that is what happened to Darinda's pool. 21,000 gallons gone in 5 hours. A $200,000 amenity turned into a cattle watering station. A board president removed. A developer exposed. A surveyor disgraced. A neighborhood forced to look at itself. And 1 old piece of ranch land, still exactly where Earl Wolfson said it was in 1951. Here is what I want you to take from this. Not just if you have an HOA. Not just if you own land. If any letter is sitting on your kitchen table right now, a notice, a fine, a demand, a threat, something that feels wrong in your gut, do not throw it away. Do not panic. Do not let official language scare you into surrender. Read it. Save it. Check the records. Ask questions. Pull your deed. Pull your covenants. Pull the meeting minutes. Find out what they are claiming and where that claim actually comes from. Because power works best on people who do not know their rights. And the moment you know what is yours, people who depend on your fear become much less dangerous. Darinda had a legal reserve, a board majority, a developer, a surveyor, a Facebook poll, a consultant, a commissioner's office, and a story she thought she could sell to everyone. I had a deed, a lockbox, a good attorney, a few honest neighbors, and enough patience not to swing before the evidence was ready. That was enough. The land remembers. The records remember. And if you are willing to stand still long enough, the truth can still make more noise than any lie. So drop your HOA story in the comments. I read every single one, and some of you have dealt with situations that would make Darinda look like a beginner. If this story hit home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And before you go, subscribe to the channel and comment which city or country you're watching from.